the Sprint 71 review. We're one sprint away from code freeze on Gaprindashvili. So next sprint we will have made a branch by next sprint. Next slide. So as usual, we'll give an overview on sprint statistics, Carol on the community, Dan on the classic UI, multitude of people and providers, on Automate, GT on platform, Alberto on API, and Chris on documentation. This sprint we had a good number of pull requests merged. You'll see how it compares to other sprints in the following slide. The classic UI took the lead in terms of number of pull requests merged, followed by integration tests, followed by the core repo. And the service UI also had 35 pull requests merged, so quite a good showing all around. So the top 5 repos there are the 2 UIs, the core, the API, and the tests, which is kind of what you would expect. Next slide. So in terms of distribution of types of PRs merged, over a third are enhancements as we're trying to get across the finish line for Gaprindashvili. A quarter are bugs. Technical debt is at 11%, refactoring at almost 9%. Developer tooling and stuff at 8.5%, and documentation 6.5%. So, good spread, kind of expected at this point in the cycle. Next slide. As you can see, this is probably the sprint with the most pull requests merged, at least on this chart, and I think that's historically true as well. So I was kind of concerned back when we were under 400, but I think my concerns are now allayed. So. Next slide. In terms of repository health, some of the significant changes here are there's work going on the NuWatch provider, so its GPA went up quite dramatically. Also, the Kubernetes provider, its GPA went up quite dramatically. Classic UI, 210 issues resolved, fantastic. And the service UI is on the bottom there with a perfect score on GPA and issues. So really good health statistics, and we really just strive to improve that on each and every sprint. Next slide, please. Over to Carol on the community update.
Hi, thanks, Oleg. So for the community side, we start with last week ManageIQ posts, this time by Drew and Libor, and they're very different styles, but both very enjoyable and interesting. And speaking of last week in ManageIQ, we need volunteers for the upcoming weeks, especially for this coming Monday. We need somebody urgently, so if you have considered writing or writing again, please contact John Prowse as soon as you can. And I think we're covered for another 2 weeks after that, and then we need more volunteers for especially November. So in addition to the last week posts, we have 2 quite new interesting posts on. First one is a tutorial by Joe on using the conversion tool for MIQ LDAP to SSSD conversion. And the second one by Jason on the H release re-architecture. So he's giving an overview there, and supposedly we'll see more of that, this series of blog posts going through the re-architecture process. And about events, next week, David and I will be at Open Source Summit in Prague. David has been working on a demo showcasing ManageIQ in a containerized environment. And the following week in San Francisco, I'm planning with the Project Atomic team to do some kind of a demo with ManageIQ and OpenShift to manage Kubernetes nodes. Right now, I don't have someone actually from ManageIQ team there at the event. So if any of you, especially from the West Coast, is interested to attend the event and maybe help out at the booth, please contact me. And that's it for this week. Thanks. And next slide, please.
All right, this is Dan. We had a lot of PRs merged. We're not striving to win that count, but we're definitely striving to merge PRs as fast as we can, and get them reviewed and merged as fast as we can, because otherwise they build up. You can see there, though, that a lot of bugs were squashed and enhancements were up as well. Tech debt was probably about what it usually is. What we should see after the next sprint is enhancements drop, bugs rise, and tech debt probably go to almost zero, because we don't want to be putting tech debt in while we're trying to clean up the bugs in the release. Also some PRs merged in the components. As far as refactoring and technical debt, I'm not going to read through these, but usual mix of fixing up some mix-ins, consolidating code, deduplifying and merging code together, some IETN in there, as well as our continuous striving to replace the PNG images in the product. Next slide, please. All right, on the enhancement side, quite a few are coming in now. Again, next sprint, or the sprint we're in now, is the final before code freeze. So a lot of the features we've been working on for quite a while are hitting in generic objects. That's been moving, kind of coming to completion here. We have custom image support now, tagging support, and the last piece of CRUD, which was the delete. There was a RFE that was done with a new delay-based retirement support. I'll show the screenshot for that. A change to alerts to be able to set severity, so that now our alerts can show up on the monitoring screen, on the monitor screen, the new monitor screen. The tag expression support was added for the group editor. I can show you that. Automate, we have embedded methods now, which allows you to kind of chain methods together, and then support for new playbook type methods. Physical servers team has been working. They have refresh now and delete, along with some new buttons for managing policies, policy simulation, tagging, and the infrastructure provider dashboards are now converted to Angular and Patternfly. This is our work this release to get all of the dashboard components into Patternfly cards, so that in the next release, whatever the H release is going to be called, we will be able to merge all of the dashboards together and kind of have the best of both worlds with dynamic dashboards. So I got some screenshots. Next slide. So now in the generic object class editor, you can see there on the bottom, you can upload a custom image file. And the next slide, wherever you see those generic objects, then at that point you'll get to see that custom image for them. So very similar to the catalog items where we allow you to upload your own images. Next slide. Delay-based retirement. So we used to have to pick a date, and now you can pick actually we changed it so you can pick a date and time. But also now we've added this feature, so you can change it to say I want to delay from now and do a time delay from now. So in other words, I just want to expire my VM in 2 months or whatever, and you can combine those together. I want to do 2 months and 2 weeks, whatever, and it'll show you the resulting date and time that it's going to expire. All right, next slide. Tag expressions in the group editor. So groups can be filtered. Basically, this is kind of part of RBAC. So you can filter them by tag. So you can say that any users in this group can only see, VMs that are tagged as production. You could also do that by department. You could say they can only see the accounting department's VMs and production. So then it would and that together. But those were very static rules. In other words, within a tag category, it was or, so you could see like production or test. But when you went across categories, it would be an and. So you could see production VMs and in accounting. So what we did was this was an RFE as well. We changed it so now you can actually put an expression based on tags. So you can put ands, ors, parentheses, all that kind of stuff, equals, not equals, things like that. So this just shows the choice of the tag expression, and then you can actually edit that expression and put any combination of tags and logic in there that you want. Next slide. Embedded methods and automate. You can see there in the green surrounding the green marker thing, there is embedded methods, and you can actually add methods that are children to this method. So when this method runs, it'll also run those. Next slide. I think this is, playbook type automate method. So you can now make an automate method that basically runs an Ansible playbook. So you get all the details in there as well, and can put in the input parameters. That's my dog, by the way. All right. Next slide.
Okay.
I'm done. Thanks.
So Adam and I will share updates from the Azure, Amazon, OpenStack, Container Management, Popular, Rev, and Lenovo providers, and then Rich will share an update on Smart State Analysis. Next slide, please. So most merged pull requests this sprint were made to the Amazon provider repo, followed by OpenStack, then Overt and Popular, and then a handful of rest from the remaining provider repos listed. Slide, please. So for Amazon, support was added this sprint for Cloud Volume Snapshot Delete, and event support was added for orchestration stacks. And network router inventory gathering was implemented this sprint by Ladislav, and I'm going to show a demo of that. Next slide, please. So here we're looking at an Amazon provider, and we're launching the network manager. And now you'll see we're displaying network routers. We'll drill into that. And we'll select one router. So with this router, we've associated instances. And subnets. We'll go back to the network manager. And we will launch the topology view. And now you'll notice we are displaying network routers. So I've highlighted a network router, and the red ring indicates that this router is inactive. And that's it. Next slide, please. So for the Azure provider, drastic performance improvements were made to private image gathering by Nick Demora from the performance team. Thank you, Nick. So Nick refactored some of the methods internal to the Azure Armrest gem that were generating a lot of intermediate objects. And so these performance improvements were released in version 091 of the Azure Armrest gem. And combined with performance improvements that Daniel Berger made last sprint, we're seeing a 50% reduction in memory consumption and a 25% execution time improvement. Pretty exciting. Next slide, please. Over to Adam.
Thanks. So the Overt team added asynchronous requests to provider inventory, which should help improve the speed of collection of inventory for Overt. They also added open virtual network management, which I believe is the first network manager for an infrastructure provider. So that's pretty cool. Middleware, they had an enhancement for showing events in the timeline when server or domain operations are requested, and a couple of fixes around downloading JDR reports and events. Next slide. For container providers, one of the enhancements was allowing you to specify your own custom CVE URL for OpenSCAP. So if you have a cluster which is completely disconnected from the internet, you can still run OpenSCAP scans for CVEs. And we dropped the component status inventory collection since it was removed from OpenShift. Next slide. We added an out-of-the-box quota report, which is out-of-the-box reports are always liked by customers, so anything they don't have to add themselves. Project quotas are a thing that have been requested a lot by customers. Roll-ups on projects are really helpful. Next slide. And another constant favorite from customers are grouping Docker labels for chargeback and container images. This is something which a lot of people have had to do SQL queries directly on the database to collect these kinds of reports, so to be able to have them out of the box is really beneficial. Next slide. And in probably the first step on getting rid of using real-time metrics for alerts, the container team added the ability to have Prometheus push alerts directly to ManageIQ, so we don't need to rely on real-time metrics to generate alerts. Next slide. For OpenStack, they had a number of updates for their orchestration stack support, and they finished a few of the other actions on OpenStack images, which are templates in ManageIQ. Next slide. And another of just associated fixes around timelines and attach and detach disks, things like that. Next slide. So this doesn't look like much, but Lenovo added support for config patterns when they collect inventory, which is essentially the physical equivalent to a customization script. So this is what they're going to be using to do provisioning of physical servers. So it's basically a config pattern is what the BIOS settings look like so that they can provision physical servers within their chassis. So this is sort of the first step in that physical provisioning that they want to do. Next slide. And over to Rich.
Okay. Over the past weeks and months, we've discovered that Microsoft has added some features. Unfortunately, they made those features the default behavior, so it became more imperative that we support those features. Namely, managed disks, managed images, managed instances. We didn't support any of those. So Jerry spent a lot of time on this and managed, no pun intended, to support these features, and it took a total of 22 PRs across 5 repositories to do that. So we now support managed images in Azure managed instances. We verified support for encrypted managed disks, which is now the default behavior. And we added support for locked disks, which are new for both blob and managed disks. So if an instance is active, their backing storage is now locked, where it hasn't been in the past, and it prevented us from reading those disks. So we now support that through snapshotting, the same way we do through as we do in VMware. Next slide, please. Okay. Ongoing development for smart state analysis in the Amazon environment. So currently, we've added an Amazon SSA support gem, which contains the core SSA code and communication mechanism to communicate from the appliance to the Amazon SSA agent that will run in the Amazon EC2 environment. We do have some pending pull requests made that should be merged shortly for an agent coordinator, which runs in the appliance and manages the agents. We're also working on asynchronous response handler because the work is now being performed in the Amazon cloud. The appliance now fields the responses asynchronously and updates the jobs accordingly. We also started looking into a new agent deployment scheme. In the past, we were going to use Yum and Bundler to install the Amazon policing code, SSA code on the agent. And sometimes that took as much as 15 minutes, and there were other issues, both technical and non-technical. Jason came up with the idea of deploying it through a container. So what we do is the agent instance is basically an atomic OS-based instance, and then we have Docker files that we load and execute the Amazon code through a container, and that's much faster, and it seems that it's going to work out pretty well. And thanks to Jason and Brandon for doing kind of proving that out and investigating it to see that it is indeed a doable thing, and hopefully by the end of the next sprint, that'll all be working. That's it for me. Next slide, please.
Okay, so for Automate, we had 37 PRs merged this sprint. You can see the various categories. Where the initial feature is complete for the Ansible playbook method. Now, the method can be used as a state machine method or a regular method, and the input parameters become extra bars with substitution enabled. That's really important because running a playbook method this way, you have no dialogue to provide information for it. As far as the regular running the playbook as a regular method, the playbook has 10 minutes or max timeout to complete. While running as a state machine method, it has 100 as the default max retries to complete. Service resource linking gives playbooks the ability to link newly created VMs to a service. So generic object support, previously support was added to enable generic object method calls from Automate. This change gives the ability to call generic object methods through the API. Next slide, please. Okay, so Automate Workspace. Madhu's made several enhancements to the Automate Workspace. And the workspace exists only for the lifetime of a method. It does persist or retries when going through a state machine. And currently, it's only accessible to Ansible methods today. Bill made some changes to orchestration templates for OpenStack. And finally, Bill fixed exposed hardware, disks, and volumes. That's it for me. Over to Greg. Next slide.
Thanks. Excuse me. So as Dan mentioned, embedded methods UI got merged in this sprint. We've had the backend support for a while, and we've been working on the UI. So if I had looked at Dan's slides or coordinated with him, I would have had it in a green box, but it's hopefully it's not too confusing. So this is where, when you're looking at a method, you can see the list of methods that basically get loaded and can be used by the script that you're putting into this method. The one thing I wanted to point out in there, if you can see it within the paths, they're both coming from the same namespace, but the second one has demo as part of the path name, which is the domain, which locks it into coming from that domain. Otherwise, the methods will use the normal domain search order, so you can actually have the same method in multiple domains, and depending on tenancy or other things, it could pull different ones in, which you may or may not want for the workflow. So next slide. This gets a little deeper into just the selection. Once you hit add method, you now get an explorer to choose, and it's limited to just the method type objects within the Automate tree. And then in the bottom right there is the checkbox to select if you include the domain as part of the pathing or not. Next slide. So I wanted to work up a quick little example that would maybe show how this would be used. On the left side, you kind of have the tree view. Might be a little hard to see, but I've created under demo a shared namespace with a class called method, and I have two methods in there, dump root objects and logging. And then at the very bottom is our common inspect me method that gets used a lot from Simulate or whatever to just see what things are held in an object. So on the right then is kind of the breakdown of those three methods. The first one, I've created a class structure, so I have automation, util, and then just a class method to dump all the root objects. The logging one just has two logging methods that I created. Very simple, kind of taking some of the parameters away from the user so they don't have to worry about all the setup. I put something in there like caller location so that the logging would naturally tell you who's calling that logging method, or it would get logged out. And then my inspect me turns into two lines. It's basically calling the logging method and calling the root objects. And the idea is that obviously other methods could share this logic, so you could start to create libraries of functionality that you share between all the methods, where today you pretty much have to copy and paste that code around. So next slide. And this is kind of putting it together. When we actually go to run the method, we build it into what you can think of as a single file. So there's what we refer to as a preamble at the top. It's 70 plus lines long, probably a little bit more, but that does all our setup logic for setting up the $EVM variables and logging and all the stuff that inline methods normally work with. And then you can see I've pretty much copied and pasted this together. That's showing then the dump root method and the logging methods, and then at the very bottom would be the methods of the lines from the method that I'm actually trying to run. So this is kind of what it looks like when it gets sent to Ruby to process. Next slide. And a quick look from the logging side. So this first line is telling you basically I'm running the inspect me method, and the second line shows it doing the domain lookup for the first dump root, since I didn't specify a domain on that one. And the next line is showing that it's going right after the logging method because it didn't have to do a domain lookup. But it's clear in the log that we're pulling in other required methods or scripts into this. And then it runs like a normal method from that point on. The next slide. So here I wanted to show a quick example because I think it's useful to note that I took my dump root method, and line 5 I just put a fake raise in there, and one of the things I did was add the line number that the raise is coming from, just so you could see specifically how we build that entire file. And then the line I highlighted there, actually if you look the one above that, you can actually see it's saying, fake error on line 100, because it's kind of pieced that whole script together. But what we do when we see that error is we actually determine what embedded method that came from and give you the line number from the embedded method. So if something really fails, it will tell you that it's coming from a different method. So here you see, dump root object line 5 is actually reporting the error. So that's insanely useful. Next slide. So a few notes about this stuff. Like I said, it does domain lookup, so you can do that. Otherwise, that can get complicated if you're doing a lot of domains, a lot of tenancy-related stuff. But so if you want to know you're loading one specific method, obviously include the domain, and then we always pull that one in. The UI doesn't stop you right now, but one of the things the backend doesn't support is nested embedded methods. So the method you're embedding can't have embedded methods on it right now. That's something we might look at doing, but right now it's a relatively simple implementation. The first method just loads whatever method you define on it. And we recommend kind of what my examples have, either creating classes or just groups of methods that get loaded in and used. The problem here is that the code execution in Ruby is top down, so if you put executable code within your embedded methods, it will run first. If you put an exit in there and it hits it, it'll never get to the code of the method that's including the module. So, we can't stop you from writing the embedded methods however you want, but it's highly recommended that code isn't, executable itself. It's classes or methods that then get used by the caller. So, and that's pretty much it. Good luck. Have fun.
Okay. Yep. On the platform side, so we had 52 PRs merged, a pretty good sprint, pretty even split between enhancements and bugs. So I'll go through highlight some of the enhancements here. So on the replication side, Nick updated the version of PG Logical to 2.1, and with that comes a bunch of bug fixes, some performance improvements, and it's our understanding that even the requirement to have the column order be the same between global and remotes is not necessary, but we haven't tested that. We will do that, but we're running with the new version now. Chris Arcan made a change to restrict the version of Postgres to what we currently support, which is 9.4 and 9.5. That'll avoid some confusion when you get some weird errors because you're using 9.6 or something higher. And as Dan mentioned, we added severity to alert definitions. So these are the internal alerts that you define within ManageIQ, and I'll show you a couple screenshots with that. Libor added metering use hours to charge back. I got a couple of screenshots of that, but I should mention that based on some discussions this morning, that's subject to change. So you might see some something different in the next review. I didn't realize Adam was going to mention this. New report projects by code items, and you'll get to see the same screenshot that he showed too, because if you were missing it, you'll get to see it again. All right, next slide. All right, some bug fixes. A couple things on the RBAC side. Libor added a bunch of additional network models to the host and clusters tab in RBAC, where that's the belongs to filters, so that you can say that these you can restrict view to these objects under a given provider, for instance. And there was a bug where there were a bunch of providers that were actually missing out of the tree view that is shown under optimize utilization. So we're only showing like one provider, maybe one type of provider. Yeah. And it was an RBAC bug, so we fixed that. It had to do with single table inheritance. So it turned out to be kind of a nasty thing. And Yuri did a fix for importing reports. This is actually a fix on something that was done to fix the API at some point where we were symbolizing all the keys, but some of that old reporting code is expecting some of the keys in the serialized columns as not to be symbolized, and it's breaking some things when you imported it. That was a good fix. And we dropped support. I think I mentioned this last time. We dropped support officially for Ruby 2.2. Next slide. Okay, so this is an example of new metering used metric. It's basically the hours used over the interval for chargeback reporting. We're talking about moving that to like a new category of reporting called metering and taking it out of chargeback. So that's the change that we talked about this morning. But you'll see this in it's pretty much going to look the same when we move it. Okay, next slide. And this is the alert editor, and now you can select the severity there. So you have info, warning, and error. And if you go to the next slide, you'll see a screenshot that I think it's very similar to what Adam showed, but this is one of the alerts that was defined within ManageIQ, and it just had a sample of each severity type there being highlighted. So now you get to see those alerts under the monitoring section in the UI, which is really cool. All right, next slide. And there's that report again. You can enjoy that, and I think that is it. Okay, Alberto.
Thanks, Greg. So on the API side, I'll go over the enhancements for this sprint. So Jillian added the ability to query the generic object as sub-collection. So the first one is essentially exposing that ability to be able to create them within the context of the object definition. So you can do a post there on the generic object sub-collection. Then the queries, the sub-collection itself, a specific resource of it. You can also query the associations for that generic object as a third example. And lastly, we also expose the generic object as a sub-collection to services to find the related generic objects of them. Next slide, please. Right, so one enhancement from two main that came in is the ability to query the security groups, and that's be able to query the sub-collection as well as a sub-collection resource, and that's made available for cloud tenants, providers, as well as VMs. Next slide, please. Okay, so we have an enhancement by Bo. This is exposing the custom attributes on services. We had that available before for VMs and providers, but we're expanding to services. Similar signatures as far as adding, editing, deleting custom attributes via the posts as shown here. We can query the custom attributes of a specific service as well as deleting a single custom attribute via the HTTP delete action. Next slide, please. Right. Next enhancement from Jillian. So here was, as was mentioned earlier, the ability to run methods of generic objects through the API. So we went through the same implementation we had for custom actions for services. So essentially, when you fetch a generic object resource, you'll see the method that were defined for it via automate as far as shown here in actions. So I have in this example test methods, and you run them like any other method or action or custom action via a post. So in this case, we're running the test method action on that generic object with parameters, and you get the standard signature for the tasks. But these are run asynchronously. So you have the task ID, task href to query. Next slide, please. Okay, so yep, the one enhancement that was needed. So when VMs here are created externally, like in Ansible playbooks, we needed the ability for them to tell us, oh, by the way, link these new resources to the service. So that's done via the add provider VMs. It's an action, and as part of the inbound data for it is which provider we are supposed to do the linking to, as well as the UID EMS for those new VMs, and standard async action signature that comes back. Next slide, please. All right, so we have an enhancement from Aparna, and this was exposing custom button sets, a new primary collection, API custom button sets, and she implemented the full CRUD for that. So posting to the collection for creating, and then the standard signatures for getting, querying the custom button sets, individual resources, the full set of post, put, and patches for the edits, as well as deletes and custom action, custom delete action for post, so you can delete multiple in one shot. So a nice enhancement from Aparna. Next slide, please. Alrighty, yep, one enhancement from Tim. We had earlier for the event stream, we used to require target type and timestamps. That was essentially to control the data set that's coming back. But since we implemented the default paging that you get anyways, we didn't feel that was necessary. So you can still query as you need to with target type and timestamp. That's standard filtering capability of the API as shown in these two examples. And that gives the user more flexibility on what they want to query, and they have paging by default, which is a big plus. So, yep. Next slide, please. All right, so for the generic objects definitions, so Jillian added the ability to basically add pictures for them. So that's done. While we create generic object definitions. You can embed the picture here with extension and the basic T4 content. You can also, if you have a picture already uploaded to the API, reference it by ID or href. So once you do this, when you query the objects, the generic objects, you can fetch their images via the relationship to the definition. Next slide, please. Alrighty, and okay, so in pictures, when we used to grab them earlier from the API, you had to ask for the href separately. So in the get done, shown here on the bottom, the image href, which is what you really are curling for getting the content of the image. So we used to ask for that separately. That's now returned by default by the API. So you ask for a picture, and whether you get the pictures curling the collection, or getting the pictures via, for example, the relationship through generic objects of services, you will get the image href. So that's one less query you need to do to the API to get that information. Next slide, please. That's it for the API.
Hi, for documentation in this sprint, we had 10 PRs merged, 6 of which were enhancements, 4 of which were bugs. Highlights there include the cloud volume restore and delete operation, procedures for managing security groups for cloud instances, and some updated markup around procedures to upload appliances to Rev. That's it.
All right. Well, that concludes this sprint demo. Unless there's any questions out there. Do we have any questions out there? Or?
No, I don't see any.
All right, well, if not, thank you very much, everyone, for contributing to the sprint. And I hope you enjoyed this presentation. And we will be back in 2 weeks with the branching of the Gaprindashvili branch.
It's easy
Stay
for you to
tuned.
say.